The MMORPG genre is probably one of the youngest of all the gaming genres we have. Sure, you can trace this back to the MUDs in the 80s and the likes of EverQuest in the 90s, but they really didn't start to get the AAA treatment until the early 2000s with the release of World of Warcraft. Since then, we've had many more MMORPGs, and they've all brought something new and original. I'm sorry, I couldn't finish that sentence with a straight face. No, pretty much any MMORPG you look at during that period were all trying to do the same thing. Be World of Warcraft. Sure, some of them had different settings, races, and a few changes to the combat, but in the end, it was just WoW with a different coat of paint. That, and many people by then already had a WoW account that they were paying for, so they weren't going to start paying for another MMO. I think it's safe to say that the only MMO during that time that was actually competing with WoW and doing successfully was Guild Wars 1. It was the only other MMO I'd heard about that stuck around without suddenly dying. I mean, who here still plays Age of Conan? More to the point, is that game even still running? I know for a fact that the Guild Wars 1 servers are still running, so that's gotta mean something. Of course, we're not here to talk about that. No, we're here to talk about Guild Wars 2. Now, before all the WoW fanboys start running to the comment section telling me how great WoW is by comparison, let me get one thing clear. I used to play WoW. Although the keywords here are used to. By the time Rage of the Firelands came out, I started to notice a pattern with the major content patches. The patches always seemed to consist of a raid dungeon I knew I'd never get into, a heroic dungeon that would get nerfed within a week, more daily quests to grind that I'd soon get bored of, and, if we were lucky, an unbalanced battlefield that was stacked in the Horde's favour. So, yeah, by the time I noticed this, I decided to get a statuette of my main character made, cancel my subscription, and never look back. Sure, I still look back fondly on my days playing WoW, but if I was ever given the option to go back, I'd always turn it down, because I just don't see that game as fun anymore. I have tried a few pay-to-win, free-to-play MMOs, but again, the WoW similarity kept coming back, and I always lost interest after a while. I honestly didn't think I'd get back into playing MMOs again, but when I was shown Guild Wars 2 by a friend, my interest was renewed. Do you want to know what it was that caught my interest? How different it was from WoW. The differences in story progression, the differences in combat mechanics, the differences in UI features. There was so much stuff that was different and new, I could hardly say no. Plus, there wasn't any subscription fee. Not much of a difference, but hey, it was a selling point. The way the story progresses in Guild Wars 2 is through the character's own personal story. This changes depending on what you chose during the character creation and choices you make later on. This does mean there can be a lack of agency from time to time, as some of the choices you make either have no consequences, and some of the characters don't even recognise you even though you saved their asses earlier on in the story. One Asuran researcher comes to mind. Still, at least the NPCs you are with do seem a little more capable than normal, and doesn't end up with a case of, Ramirez, go do everything! Well, not all the time.
But they just stood there. Alas, neither of them knew how to do something for themselves. And when no great hero came to save the day, they died of boredom.
This does mean that the story is a very closed-off experience, but you do have the option of bringing along a buddy to help if need be. Plus, it just makes you feel like the story involves you on a more personal scale. It's called the personal story for a reason, you know. There are also living story events as well. These take place in the open world and changes once every few weeks, so it's kind of like watching a series on TV. These are only temporary for the most part, but they do tend to leave a few permanent things behind. Take the Tower of Nightmares chapter, for example. Kessex Hills will never be the same again. Of course, with most of this being temporary, it means if you've missed it, you pretty much missed out. Especially as each one has its own special reward that you can earn from completing a set number of achievements. This doesn't tend to be much other than armor skins and pets, but there are some things like the mineral nodes that you can get for your home instance that can be a pretty big deal if you miss them. Questing has also changed rather drastically as well. Instead of normal quests, you now have tasks and events. Tasks are like your typical quests in that you can complete them once and then you get a bucket load of XP once you're finished. Heck, you don't even need to visit the NPC to start. You just be in the general area and you'll be notified of the task and you can get started. Once you're done, you can then spend karma points that you can also earn to buy rewards from the task giver. So instead of it being, you've completed my task, but you can only have one item as a reward, It goes more along the lines of, "You've completed my task. If you've got the karma, you can buy all my rewards." Events are similar, except that they happen at specific times, can be part of a chain, or even part of an overarching plot point to the current map. These can be repeatedly done when they become active, and the more people that take part, the bigger reward you get at the end. One thing to note is that depending on how involved you were with the event, depends on how big the reward you'll get. So you can't just turn up at the very end and expect to get the full reward. The game knows, Big Brother is watching, etc. Combat is another area that takes a massive step away from other MMOs. Rather than the character and his target just standing there trading blows like they're still playing Final Fantasy, the game encourages you to stay on the move, given that 95% of your skills are done while moving. Plus, you no longer have to rely on a random number generator in order to dodge and block attacks, as you're given an endurance bar that lets you dodge twice in a row, while block skills are linked to weapon skills. Speaking of skills, this system takes another step away from the traditional MMO formula by making it that you can only have 10 active skills at any given time. The first 5 depend on what weapon or weapons you are currently using, and the second 5 depend on your profession. Some might say that this is restrictive, but I feel that it keeps things focused and the UI uncluttered. It also means that combat requires more skill from the player, and that the skills have their own use in certain situations, rather than just being something that never gets worked into a 4 or 5 spell skill rotation. Case in point, Druids in WoW. How many of you have found a way to include the Wild Mushroom spell in your spell rotation? Didn't think so. That said, that doesn't mean that this combat system doesn't have its problems either. Because the system doesn't rely on the Holy Trinity, it tends to lead to most combat situations being very zergy. That is starting to be addressed somewhat in the recent Living Story update, but it's still something that needs to be fixed in the earlier content. The PvP is... okay, I guess? Alright, I can't really say much about this as I don't play it that often. However, you are able to play either PvP system from level 1. Structured PvP is done in a similar way to how Arathi Basin was done in WoW, in that you have 2 teams competing for points to be the first to reach a set goal. There are a few maps that introduce capture the flag elements to the mix, but they aren't as poorly implemented as what happened with Eye of the Storm. Biggest design flop ever! The best thing about there not being any opposing factions means that each team is on equal footing, so there isn't any favouritism on either side, and the gear is pretty much neutral as well, meaning that, again, it's all down to skill. World vs. World is a fight between 3 servers competing over resources and towers that result in each gaining bonuses for their home server, such as chances to find better loot and quicker recovery times. Looking at it, this is really how WoW should have done World PvP, as it isn't on a timer, only for when the other 2 servers that you're fighting against changes. You can also choose to level up your character in this mode if you wish. Now that's choice for you. So, to sum up, Guild Wars 2 is a fairly unique MMO, mostly because it tries to set itself apart from the other MMOs, mostly World of Warcraft, if that isn't apparent enough for the fact that I keep referencing it. It has enough going for it that it can compete with WoW on nearly the same level. Oh, and while I'm here, I may as well say this to all the WoW fanboys out there who bash Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2 will not take WoW away from you. If World of Warcraft fails, it'll be for its own fault, not because Guild Wars 2 came along. If you're looking for an MMO that doesn't make you feel like you're playing WoW all over again, I'd give it a look, but I won't blame you if you don't get into it.
Fear not this night, you will not go astray. Though shadows fall, stars far away. Fear not this night, you will not go astray. Though shadows fall, stars far away.
Oh, by the way, WoW players, has Sylvana stopped whining about the fact that she's undead yet? I mean, she's been bitching about it since Warcraft 3, and when I stopped playing WoW, she still hadn't stopped. I mean, get over it already, Sylvanas. You're not the only one of your people who's undead, you know. Just move on. Seriously. It's getting annoying.